Welcome to the Act Out Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Tomlin. Today's guest is the host of Raising Men Podcast, Shaun Dawson. Let's roll the tape. Shaun, how are you, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Adam, thank you so much for the invitation to be part of your podcast and your movement. It's great to chat with fellow like-minded people, and it's a subject that I'm really passionate about. I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, I told you a little bit earlier before we started recording that as soon as I saw your biography, I was like, I have got to talk to Shaun, and so I'm really glad that we could get this organized.
Likewise.
Do you want to start off by telling the listeners what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the host of a podcast called Raising Men, and I, that's not what I do for a living. It's what I took on as a passion project. And, I'm kind of in a career transition right now.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I kind of has been working in the back of my head ever since my son was born is that we're in kind of a masculinity crisis right now. And it is absolutely exacerbated by social media and just kind of the timber of politics and social cohesion that's going on right now. And there are a lot of voices that, to my view, are in these extremes. Either you have this sort of extreme left viewpoint that masculinity is evil and should be suppressed, or you have the reactionary black-pilled response to that, which is, no, we embrace everything that's just ugly about life and about being an asshole. And masculinity is just amplifying and valorizing all those things. And obviously, neither of those things are true. Our boys are the casualties of that. And when I look at my son and I look at my daughter is not going to have trouble working herself into our culture. The culture is going to embrace her with open arms. And I mean, she's going to be a force to be reckoned with, no question. My son has an equally strong personality, but as he gets into TK and kindergarten and now first grade, it's clear that our culture is trying to turn him into something that is not. And it's like trying to beat out of him some of what makes him a boy.
Okay.
And I need to figure out how to manage that. And the way that the society that he's graduating into is so different from the one that I grew up in. It might as well be a foreign country. And so, I need to figure it out. And frankly, I started the podcast as a way to try and have this journey with other like-minded folks, and make friends with guys like you.
So let's kind of start off. I don't want to label you with any age. I'm 39. Yeah, 30. I'll be 40 in September. Old
you
enough
can tell
to
you're
not
of that
be
age
able...
where you stop remembering what age.
Exactly.
It goes away. By the way, that goes away when you turn 50. So between 35 and 40, you can't remember how old you are because you're still young enough to I'm pretty young and you feel like 28, but you're old enough so that it doesn't really matter all that much. And frankly, there's not a whole lot to be gained by claiming age that's bigger than you are. As soon as you turn 50, you're like, holy crap, I'm 50. and you feel your age. And so I'm 51. Yeah. And
I never would have guessed that.
I haven't forgotten since I turned 50. I haven't forgotten how old I was one time.
Well, the thing is, I have a 2-year-old son. He'll be 3 in just a few weeks, actually. So every single day, by the end of the day, I feel like I'm about 78 with how much I'm having to bend over and run around. So
yeah, I started 15 years later than you, and I'm telling you, man, the earlier you can have kids, the better, and also the more kids you can have, the better. That's another thing that I've discovered. That is not something that's obvious because the problem is you have your first kid and you're like, oh my God, that is so much work. I don't think I could do another one. But then you have the second one and it's not twice as much work. It's actually, to some extent later on, it's less work because they can play with each other and you're not their only friend. And so there's an interesting dynamic there. It's not less work to have two, but it definitely, there is a economy of scale there. That
whenever I was, I used to work at a recreation department whenever I was in college. And the director of it was he was, I think, in his 50s, and I was just like early 20s. And at first I was like 19. And whenever I was a freshman, he was like, Adam, do not have kids until you're at least 40. That way you're more established, everything, you'll feel better.
Yeah.
By the time I was 21, he was like, have kids as early as possible. You're going to run out of energy, man. He completely flip-flopped.
That's hilarious. Yes, that is me. That is me.
So whenever I'm going to lump you and me in the same generation. We practically are anyway.
Absolutely.
Whenever we were growing up, how would you define masculinity? 80s and 90s.
Yeah, the metaphor I like to use is like a castle. And back in 80s, 90s, 70s, right, we were thinking about masculinity as how strong is your castle? How strong are the walls? How impregnable are those walls? And the problem with that is if you want to maximize the strength of the walls of your castle, you have to decrease the size of the courtyard to where it's very, very small, which means that nothing can thrive inside the castle. It really is just a stronghold. It's also quite brittle, meaning like if anything does get through the walls or if you end up with a threat that isn't physical, then it's useless.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, I think, and I mean, I don't think it's ever not been the case that this was true, but it's a little bit more obvious that it's a lot less important how strong your walls are in the castle than how much area they encompass. How much is your protected zone, right? How much community is able to thrive under your domain?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think about it that way, then your walls are going to be a lot bigger. They're going to be a lot, you're going to leverage the terrain more, right? You're going to make sure that you cultivate things within the castle. You're going to have nice gates that open up 99% of the time, but can close if they need to be. And you're going to have a garrison. And you're going to think about your castle design differently if you're not just focused on withstanding an attack that, by the way, might never come because our society is so different than it was 2,000 years ago or whenever. And so that's the metaphor that I like to use. So back in the 70s, masculinity, I think, was primarily defined as a show of strength. Like how strong can you demonstrate that you are? And the downside of that is oftentimes you're brittle.
Yes, very much so. And whenever you're talking about strength, you're talking exterior, aren't you? I mean, there's not really...
Yeah, and we're not even talking about necessarily actual strength, but the implication of strength. Outward trappings of strength.
I don't know about you, but as far as emotions or feelings were concerned, the way that you could show strength for me growing up would be how well you could contain those emotions inside of you.
Yeah. You as a man, you're not allowed to show emotion other than anger.
And even anger, it's very specific. There's certain rules to it as well. Well, at least for me growing up, my dad was a police officer. So
oh, wow.
Yeah. Wasn't going to get too angry,
Sure.
Yeah. But that's something that I have kind of thought of a lot, where it's sort of this kind of machismo idea of strength. It's either how much you can bench press or how well you can kind of keep that calm, steely demeanor. And like I tried that for 30 some odd years, not very good at counting. But all that did for me, though, was get me a spinal fusion in my L5-S1.
Wow.
And a therapy bill that I am, still racking up to this day.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think that what that kind of mind frame did for me, and I'd kind of like to get your opinion on it as well, is like it put me so far behind the 8 ball with being able to regulate myself that by the time I started, I was doing basically like the see and say therapy. Like, the horse says neigh, but it'd be like with happiness or sadness, like, where's that in my body? And that was in my 30s.
Yeah.
Uh, did you have a situation like that? Like, did you kind of like slowly start changing to where you felt more free to express your emotions, or is that
Yeah,
kind of
that's an
something you
excellent
had?
question. I haven't thought that much about that, and I was always a fairly emotional person,
Mm,
compared to a lot of other people. When I was growing up and I was in high school and stuff, I I was in drama. I was in speech. I kind of played sports a little bit. The rest of my family is very athletic. I wasn't
mhm,
back in those days. And then I ended up getting into athletics much later when I got into my 30s. And so it was, I think I've always kind of had this bent towards, man, I mean, that kind of outward display of, I don't know, physical prowess was never really part of my, I
mhm,
mean, and then it kind of became that way. But I was self-aware enough at that time to recognize that it wasn't everything, and it wasn't everything for me. And I had always really prided myself on my intellectual capabilities more than my physical ones, and I
mhm,
thought that was better suited
mhm.
to modern challenges anyway. And
Yeah.
I always had kind of a sense that overall sense of masculinity that our society was trying to cram down everyone's throats wasn't exactly right. It wasn't until I had my kids that I realized that unless I'm careful, I'm going to impart some of the same mistakes that and issues and weaknesses that I have that I've
Mhm,
tried to overcome. I'm gonna give those to my children if I'm not careful, if I'm not intentional about what I'm doing. And so I decided to make a study of it.
mm. That, that's, so, like, so very similar to my story. Whenever, my wife and I tried, for about a year and a half to
Mhm.
have a kid.
Wow.
And so, we did the assisted, reproductive technology, whatever it is,
Yeah.
as we finally got to IVF, and, luckily, the, like, first, implantation or whatever the right word is, it's been a few years now, I can't remember it all now. Luckily that took, and, she got pregnant with Camden, and
That's
I
that's just it's so fortunate. Many
mm,
couples entering into that just really struggle with that. I have a bunch of friends who've been doing that and
mhm.
really, really fortunate.
It's it's unreal to want something so bad, and you see other couples who just, it just kinda happens naturally and stuff, and you get it's very frustrating. Yeah,
I
it's
can't imagine. Yeah, and your wife, I imagine, feels responsible.
mhm.
If she feels like a bad person, I imagine. I imagine also that there was a real challenge to your masculinity as well, because
Yeah,
what am I? What kind of man am I? I can't even sire a
right.
child.
Mhm.
Boy, I can imagine what that must be like. Yeah, I'm eager to hear about more about this and ask about
Y
it.
Yeah, man, so you're right. There was, especially for me, I actually haven't asked Kaylin how she, like, if she kind of felt like, like a little, like, lesser than or anything during that process.
Yeah.
I certainly did, though. So there were, like, a couple of tests that, like, I would have to do. So, like, I would go to different kind of doctors, and every doctor I went to, it would be the most embarrassing experience of my
Of
life.
course.
Uh, like, I could barely even, like, bring myself to say why I was even there in the first place.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
You know? Yeah, and so it's so weird, to me to think back now, like, on that frame of mind, but, I mean, it was absolutely almost like is Camden even a real kid if I can't, if we can't do it, like, on our own?
Yeah. Yeah.
But, trust me, he's very
He's
real,
very
and
real. He's
I
very
have the
noisy.
mess
He's all over
downstairs
the
to prove
place.
it. Yes.
Yeah. You know, so let me ask you something about that experience, because one of my formative situations was that when my son was born, my wife fell madly in love with him the instant he came out of her body, but I didn't. And in fact, I felt that there was something wrong with me because I looked at that thing and I felt nothing.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until about 6 weeks later that I started connecting with him and I started being able to teach him things. And that's when I was like, now I have the twinge.
Mhm.
But we didn't struggle, right? We didn't
Yeah.
have rounds of IVF and all of the therapy and the tests and all of those things that you talk about. So was your experience different, or did you do what I discovered? I discovered that 80 or 90% of men are the same as me. And
Yep.
I thought I was weird. I thought I was sociopathic or something like that.
Mhm.
It turns out that I'm the rule. The exception is the dad who just falls magically in love with his son. But those are the ones that post on Instagram. And so those
Yeah.
are the ones we see. And so what was your experience like with that? Did the IVF aspect change anything for you?
First of all, the ones that post on Instagram are probably the most insecure and like
That's
worst off
probably
out of
true as
all
well.
of us.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But so I was actually that's kind of what I was like originally getting at though. Sean, was where like we tried so hard to get pregnant, and I in my head I wanted it so bad, and then whenever we got the news, like she was ecstatic, and I kind of had like this sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, like shit, I'm
Wow.
like this. I'm gonna be a dad now.
Yeah.
And so it was this like weird thing where like I mean, ever since I was knee high to a grasshopper, I wanted to get married, have kids, have a family. That was what was in my head,
Yeah.
from the jump.
Yeah.
And then whenever I was married and my wife was pregnant, all of a sudden I'm like, I don't think I'm ready for this.
Mhm.
And it, to kind of, go back to your point, I noticed that there were patterns that I was repeating that I saw like had a detrimental impact on me as a kid. I knew that they shouldn't be done, but I saw myself doing them and being absolutely powerless to stop them unless I got help.
Mhm.
And I was never forget this, man, painting the nursery closet and Creed, the song that the lead singer of Creed wrote about is whenever he just found out his wife was pregnant, like
Yeah.
the second verse of that song was like, I hope the kid's not like me. I hope he'll understand that he can have a great life. Essentially that. And I remember having that song on repeat and like just like blaring out that like second verse almost at the top of my lungs, just like tears like flowing down my face. I'm like, if the lyrical genius of Scott Stapp is affecting me this much right now, I need some serious help.
No question. Yeah, that's the thought that occurred to me as well is, man, look at this guy's life. This guy, how does he not have everything he ever wants? And he's struggling with this stuff? Like,
Mhm.
what chance do I have?
Yeah, and just like you, man, I feel like a psychopath saying this. The very first time I held Camden in my arms, I knew on an intellectual level that I loved him more than anything, and that like I would give my life for him. Like I knew that, but at the same time, whenever I was holding him, I felt absolutely nothing. There was no like rush of joy or like hope or like I didn't like dissociate and see stars. No, I felt like my heart rate was perfectly steady.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, no, there's
If
something wrong
anything,
with
there's a
me.
little bit of anxiety there. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
now there's another mouth to feed.
right. So how you said it took about 6 weeks for you, and like being able to kind of like start teaching.
Yeah, for me, it sort of started to click, and it didn't really click until a little bit later, but it started to click. I was changing his diaper one time, and yeah, I kind of got finished, and then I held my fingers out for him to reach up and pull him up, and I basically in that moment I trained him to reach up and pull himself up rather than have me like just pick him up out of the thing, and that's when it started to click. It didn't fully click. When my wife and I were um, thinking about having kids. When we first got together, we really weren't going to.
Mhm.
And and then after we got married, she came to me and said, "Listen, I think I might have changed my mind about kids. I'm interested to know if I'd like you to think about it, and if you decide that you're up for it. I would like to have kids. And that kind of threw me for a loop. And so I'm an engineer. And so I did basically a field study. I was traveling a lot at the time. And so I asked everyone I met and everyone I knew, whether they had kids or not, I would ask them how they felt about their decision.
Mhm.
And the good news is that everybody was pretty happy with whatever decision they'd made. The non-parents, though, were mostly happy because they had a lot of money and they could go on vacations whenever they want. They didn't really have to worry about anything. But the parents were happy in this almost spiritual way.
Mm.
And the guy that was a friend of mine who was the CTO of the company I used to work for, I was meeting with him and we were sitting on his deck watching his beautiful wife and at the time, their 3-year-old son was out there playing in the yard and they were throwing Frisbee for the dog. And he says to me, he says, I love my wife. My wife, I mean, she's great. But that boy's my soulmate.
Mm.
And I kind of I was like, that I get. That's
Mhm.
that I want that. And it wasn't, I mean, like I said, when I'm sitting there dealing with the fact that my son is projectile vomiting across the room, impressively, and now I have to clean all that stuff up, and now I have to feed him again, and like I'm worse off than I was 15 minutes ago. I didn't feel that,
Mhm.
but I do now, and I can think of small emblematic moments that are like that, and actually, it's made me think back to my own childhood with my own father, and realize that there are ways that he was trying to tell me the same thing.
Mm.
And I didn't get it. But I was his soulmate too. And so, I think maybe that's one of the things, the absolute keys to what we need to be doing as fathers is they need to come apart, or they need to come away with that feeling, that
Mhm.
understanding that you're their soulmate, and they're your
So
soulmate. You'll
yeah.
be their soulmate, right?
Right.
They'll have their own spouse, and they'll have their own children, hopefully. And
Mhm.
they'll have their own soulmates, but he'll always be mine. And it's that way. I have one son and one daughter, and I feel differently about my daughter. It's not any less, but it's definitely different.
Where do you think the disconnect was between you and your dad to where you said that he was trying to tell you, but you couldn't hear him? Where do you think that disconnect came from?
I think that he just didn't have the words to quite say it the way
Mm.
the way that he would have liked to. Wasn't It wasn't permissible. I remember early on, my son was about, I don't know, maybe 2 years old, and he came up, and my wife said to him, "Oh, go give your dad a kiss." And he came up and he tried he kissed his mom, and then on the lips, and then he came
Mhm.
over, and my wife said, "Oh, give your dad a kiss." And he came over to kiss me on the lips, and I turned my cheek and let him kiss me on the cheek. And my wife said to me, she said, "Why wouldn't you let him kiss you on the lips?" And reflexively, I said, "Men don't kiss each other on the lips."
Mm.
And she goes, "Hmm." And that was it. But it stuck in my brain. And
Yeah.
I thought about it. Like, why did I feel that? And I just cranked on it. And the next day, I was like, I realized that that is coming from a place that's not healthy. There's some aspect, oh, I'm going to turn my son gay or something, and being gay is bad, and I wouldn't want to do that. And that's coming from a dark place in my history.
Mhm.
And I want my son to want to kiss me on the lips. And by the way, there's health aspects to it. And, there's
Right.
not a cut and dried thing. Like, I can see coming either way, coming down on either side of that. But
Mhm.
it's perfectly fine to come down on the side that we don't kiss each other on lips, because you're being intentional about it, not because you're being
Mhm.
reflexively, letting this history, this baggage weigh you down. And so, I went to my wife the next day. I said, you know what? I've been thinking a lot about that thing about the lips kissing. And I've realized that was not coming from a healthy place. And I've decided to change my mind about it. And so, and I said the same thing to the boy. And now he kisses me on the lips when he gets to school.
So, Shaun, how were you able to be curious with yourself in that situation? And so I think before, if that same thing would have happened to me, and like my wife would have said, well, I kind of had that same interaction, I would have judged myself. I'm like, you're an idiot. Why didn't you? And that would just kind of come hammered down on myself.
Yeah.
How were you able to be curious with yourself instead of judgmental?
I love this question. I have been thinking a lot about the role of shame. Your reaction that you just described basically is a way for you to make yourself feel shame. And shame is a way that our culture and our society has of trying to influence our behavior by threatening that you're no longer going to be part of the crowd. And that is an existential kind of threat feeling to us. And so being shamed is like can feel like a threat to your life.
Oh, yeah.
And there's no place for it. Almost no place for it. I don't know how strongly I feel that way. I think there probably are things that maybe would warrant it. But I actually think that wielding shame as a weapon does more harm than good. And in fact, for a lot of people, it can inure them to being shamed. And then you start to get some of the behavior that we see in like hyper online people. Hyper online people get shamed all the time. And so they get resistant to it. Doesn't really affect them anymore. And then they start to behave in ways that are really, really counterproductive. And especially when you're trying to apply shame to yourself, that's ridiculous. And so I got this reflex at some point. I developed this reflex against doing that to myself. And it's not perfect, believe me. But it always, when I start to feel that sense in my chest of starting to feel ashamed of something, I interrogate it. And, why am I feeling this way? And what is the appropriate way to feel? Because it's almost never the case that it's appropriate to feel shame.
Yeah, I noticed what you said is that you feel it in your chest. So is that kind of like a somatic thing? You're like, oh, I noticed that my chest is kind of starting to feel a little tight, and then that's kind of like ooh, okay, yeah, this is going to trigger a certain kind of feeling here. I need to jump on
it. I feel it right here. And when I have that feeling, it triggers analysis for me.
So the brain is incredibly powerful in that it can design and shape your reality. And so something that you hear over and over again is going to be incorporated into your reality.
That's right.
So if this internal voice that you have, like, oh, I'm a piece of shit, or I'm terrible, I'm never going to do this, if you hear that enough, your mind is going to create a reality in which you totally feel as if you are a POS or if you're a horrible person.
100%. Yeah. There's a whole body of study around sports psychology. And there's this interesting finding in that little world about your brain can't even distinguish. Like if you say, don't mess up, right? Your brain doesn't hear the don't. It doesn't hear the not there. It only hears mess up. And you will mess up if you do that. And negative self-talk is the absolute bane of performance. It is the absolute bane of performance. And, the world is perfectly happy to make you feel shitty. Why are you contributing to that? Like there are a zillion other people that are perfectly happy to beat you down. Why are you going to contribute to that?
And to kind of go a little bit more on that point, I think it's Michael Phelps. Before, like the night before every race he would sit down and imagine different possibilities. Him swimming and his goggles falling off, or him, and he had all of these different thoughts. Like, okay, well, this could go wrong, and he would imagine himself fixing his goggles or
Mhm.
turning whatever it was, making adjustments,
Yeah.
and his brain was training himself. So, like, okay, something bad happens. I do this, I pivot, I get over it.
That's right.
So yeah, so it's not just the negative thing that your brain creates a reality around. It can also be the positive too.
100%. That's the yeah. That's the tension there. Your brain can make whatever reality you want it to. So you might as well make it a good one.
Did you ever have to have therapy or anything, or did
Oh, yeah.
this stuff just come? Okay, all right. I was about to be extra pissed if you were just like, if you just happened to
No,
be like,
I was really fortunate, Adam. I had maybe the most amazing mother in the history of mothers. She was absolutely unbelievable. She was, I mean, talk about my soulmate. She was that to me as well.
Mhm.
She was an angel, and she died when I was 21, which, I mean, there's just nothing I wouldn't do to have her back. She would love her grandchildren, but I was really fortunate, and she was so wise. And in fact, it was almost a gift that she was taken from us as early as she was, because she never became mortal to me.
Mhm.
She is ensconced in my brain in this movie that, she's a fictional figure now. She's been gone longer than she was around, or she's been gone to me longer. To me, she's been gone longer than she's been around, right? Um, and so that avatar that I have of her it was very helpful to me, and so it is. So that's part of it, but yeah, I mean, it's also the case that I started in therapy when I was very young, and so I never had this kind of sense that only weak people go to therapy, or whatever it is that keeps people from
Mhm.
doing that. So I don't. I mean, I consider therapy like going to a coach
Mm.
or a trainer. Are you weak if you can't go to the gym without there being a trainer there to teach you how to do a bench press?
Mhm.
No, and by the way, you can do a bench press by yourself, right? But having a trainer focuses your efforts in a little bit.
Mhm.
They're an expert. You don't have to become an expert in this thing, because they're going to be there for you. And by the way, they hold you accountable. These are all things that are really tough to do. This is why we need these people. And so, I mean, if you're willing to hire a trainer to train your physical body, why wouldn't you be willing to hire one to train your mind? Because your mind is way more important.
Yeah. I Where were you 5 years ago, man? You could have you could have really saved me some time. When did you decide to start your podcast?
Yeah, I have been thinking about it for probably about 4 or 5 years ago now.
Mhm.
And finally, about 7 months ago, I was on a walk, and I was just thinking about it, and I was listening to a different podcast. Um, and I just felt like the content around masculinity that I have access to, I'm not happy with it. I don't think most of it does service to the problem. And, some of it identifies the problem well, but then the solutions are either non-existent or too systematic or just wrong.
Mhm.
I was on that walk, and I thought, I need to start the podcast. What am I going to call it? And I said, I'll call it Raising Men, because that's what it's about. How do we raise excellent men
Mhm.
in our modern culture? And I said, tell you what, I made a deal with myself. I'm going to go back to my hotel room. I was on a business trip. I'm going to go back to my hotel room. I'm going to see if I found out during this walk, I found out that there was a top level domain. So I could get the raising.men URL.
Mm.
And I said, okay, if that URL, if that domain name is available, I will buy it and I'll start the podcast. And if it's not, then that's the universe telling me this isn't the right time or whatever. So I went back to my hotel and I typed the domain into my URL registrar and it was available. So I bought it. And it was that, like, it had been churning in the back of my mind for years and years and years. And I finally decided to bite the bullet. I decided how much it would cost me and squirreled the money aside. And I decided to do it.
So I think earlier how you kind of defined the problem, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's kind of masculinity, almost attacked from both sides, where you got the left or the extreme left position being that like masculinity is inherently bad.
Yeah.
And then you have the extremist right that is saying that it is only masculinity, go patriarchy forever. Is that what is that what you see the problem as, or have I
completely messed up? Exactly. And I mean, I think that that's an encapsulation of what we see everywhere. I mean, like the way that these messages end up getting amplified is all through social media. Social media, these people get rich by making us mad at each other. So they take we agree on 90% of stuff, but social media is expert at figuring out the 10% of stuff we don't agree on and making us snipe at each other about it. And masculinity is a really important thing. We need good men, and it is getting that treatment. And so what you see, the loud voices that you see are the ones on the extremes, the extreme hyper masculinity is evil folks and the extreme hyper, no, evil is good folks. And what I'm hoping to do is be a part of the voices in the middle and hopefully like you, right? And hopefully we will outweigh the messaging from
yeah, that's literally one of the big reasons why I started this. I wanted to kind of provide that counterbalance. I'm glad that we got folks like you helping me out.
Likewise, the more the merrier.
Yeah. So where do you see the sweet spot for masculinity? What's the middle ground for you between those two?
Yeah, one of the interesting realizations that I've had through this entire process is that our job is essentially to manage tensions. And so that extreme that I talked about is in itself a tension, right? You have the extreme of masculinity is evil, and you have the extreme of no, evil is good. And the reality is somewhere in the middle. And so what I've discovered is if you ever have anyone telling you, no, this is the way things are, there's always an opposite to that is in tension with that. And the reality is somewhere in the middle. And the real key strength and the real key intelligence is to figure out where that tension needs to be and dial it in appropriately. And masculinity is the same way. Masculinity is, healthy masculinity is a way of taking the masculine virtues, right? These are things like our desire to be a protector, our desire to be a provider, our way of doing things, without necessarily needing to have it attributed to us. These sorts of things, these are masculine virtues, and applying them in a way that is consistent with our modern society. And, we also have challenges associated with the fact that our institutions are crumbling. And so a lot of the institutions that turned us into men, that were these kind of like rites of passage or those sorts of things, those are gone now. And, again, there's a tension there. That's a problem in the sense that we don't have rites of passage. My son is not by default going to get, cast out into the wilderness to kill a tiger and bring him back. But that's also a good thing. He's not going to have to risk his life. But I better be intentional about creating those rites of passage for him. And by the way, for myself, because I haven't necessarily gone through the necessary rites of passage to teach me about what it takes to be a good man. And so that's, that's another example of the places where we just need to be intentional about how we're living our lives. We need to know what our values are, and those values are going to be different for me than they are for you. There's going to be a lot of overlap, and we need to set ourselves on the journey of making sure that we're contributing, not detracting from people's sense of peace and safety. And again, we're trying to build that castle, and we're trying to get that community inside that castle to be as large and as vibrant as we can.
You mentioned a lot of things, but the two of the biggest that I caught were that there's like an innate desire for men to kind of want to protect and to provide.
Yeah,
that is certainly, I've had that, and I mean still have that desire. What I noticed before was that I think that my identity was tied into being a provider or being a protector. So, there was a period whenever I lost my job, and I think it was like 2018 or 2019, and for like probably a solid like 6 months, I felt like I was the most worthless human being on the face of the earth because I was no longer the provider.
Right.
So I think that it's kind of tricky to have those like ideals, but not have them be a full part of your identity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I would push back on that a little bit, in the sense that there is a component about being a provider that is making enough money for the family, right? That's definitely part of being a provider, but it's not all of it, right? Being a provider is also making sure that you are present with your children, and that you, again, we need to cultivate the village inside the castle walls. And so if all you're ever doing is going off to work, and you're not a father to your children, are you really being a good provider? Even if you make all of the money necessary to provide for their physical needs, are you really being a provider? By the same token, if you are unable to bring in a paycheck for whatever reason, right? Maybe you've lost your job, maybe you were injured, maybe whatever. Does that mean you can't be a provider? Does that mean you can't do those other things? No, of course it doesn't. And so I think that we need to widen the aperture a little bit about what it means to be a provider, and recognize that it's not enough just simply to bring home a paycheck, and that it's not, if you're not bringing home a paycheck, that's not all of it.
No, that is a great point, and it's something that I had not even considered until you had done the pushback. So thank you. At first, I was going to tell you to F off. But no, it's very true. That in my head, the only way that a man could be a provider is with a paycheck. And you mentioning providing attention and time and being present with your kids as being a provider, I kind of completely opened up my mind to like a new angle on that I'd never considered before. Right there.
Yeah. By the way, there's a similar kind of dynamic with being a protector. You could characterize being a protector as being, again, being a good fighter and being strong and having guns all over the house just in case an intruder comes. But that's not, that was a view of being a protector 1,000 years ago. In our modern society, being a protector is a lot more about creating emotional safety.
Yes.
Making your kids afraid that there was an intruder about to enter the house in a moment, and having guns around, and you everyone fully trained because, the bad guys are coming. If that's not an actual risk, if that's not as much of an actual risk as you make it out to be, you're not actually being a protector in that circumstance, are you?
Right.
It's one thing if you live in Fallujah. It's another thing if you live in Des Moines, Iowa. And, there are physical threats and there are risks, and you do need to manage them, but you also have to manage them in a way that helps your children thrive and creates emotional safety. That's being a protector.
How do we teach, or do we teach, or do we provide an example perhaps to men to help kind of get the idea forward that being a protector is about providing, emotional peace and emotional stability as well.
Yeah. So one of the absolute truest possible lessons that I have learned in the amount of time that I've been doing this podcast is teaching, talking, writing, all of that stuff is 10% of it. The doing is the 90% of it. The kids will watch what you do and they will emulate you and they will
Mhm.
not listen to what you say. In many cases, they won't even hear it. And so that's one aspect of it. In order to raise good men, we have to be good men. That's 90% of it. And by the way, being a good man is not being a perfect man. It's it's actually recognizing the ways in which you fall short. I had an episode 2 days ago. I've been going through some relatively intense emotional strain in my personal life and professional life right now.
Mhm.
And so I'm struggling a little bit. And so I was putting the kids to bed and one of the kids wanted this one book that he just loves. And it's this kind of fun, like for some reason in this book, I was reading the book and one day I decided to start screaming the dialogue and the kids, like I yell at the top of my lungs reading this book and the kids just thought it was the funniest thing in the entire world. And so every once in a while they want me to read this book and this is, they want me to scream the part. And so in this particular case, my son wanted me to read the yelling book, but my daughter just wasn't in the mood for the yelling. And it turned into this real negative thing where I was yelling to my son and my daughter was freaking out and she went to the other room and she started screaming at me. And pretty soon we were all screaming at each other and we were all mad. And I was like, I wanted to throw the book away. Actually, I did. I threw the book away. I'm not reading this stupid book anymore. And I got really, really, really upset. I was at my wit's end when we started this whole thing. I just needed to go to bed so I can get back to work, all of that stuff. And I just lost it.
Mhm.
And I even recognized it as it was happening. I'm like, what on earth are you doing, man? And I couldn't stop myself.
Mhm.
And, I'm pretty self aware about this stuff. And I'm in the process of crapping the bed here. And so all I could do is get everything wound down and then go apologize.
Mhm.
And I sat down with my son, who, he looked really scared when I was doing this. And I said, you know what? I'm really sorry, man. I should not have blown up like that. I should not have yelled like that. I should not. That's not who I want to be. And that's, I'm really sorry that you had to endure that. I'm not going to throw away the book. It's, like, let's reset here. I did the same thing to my daughter. And so, like, ideally, I would love to have never made that mistake. But frankly, it's probably better for my kids that I made the mistake because now they can see how to handle that sort.
Right.
And I got to model that too. So the first
Mhm.
thing is modeling the kind of behavior that you need and you know what to do, right? The
Mhm.
second piece is your friend your children need to be able to see that in other men also. So
Mhm.
surrounding your children with other good men like yourself. So be one yourself, surround yourself with them, surround your children with them. That's about 90% of it.
Hmm. Just in that example that you provided, doing a lot of things right there. But two of the big things, there was the rupture, but the repair was right there too.
Yeah.
So that is more powerful than almost anything else. Is to provide an example of like screwing up, and then like showing your kids that afterwards you can actually repair afterwards, even if there's something big that happens. It's not insurmountable if you come together and apologize and get it right. There can be a repair.
Yeah. Imagine
And
imagine your kids had to learn how to drive by sitting in the passenger seat and watching you. And you drive totally perfectly. You never have to slam on your brakes. You never have to swerve to avoid anybody. You only go on certain well-known paths and all that stuff. What are they going to I mean, the instant they get out in their own, they're going to have a
Mhm.
car accident. They're going to crash into something because they don't know what it looks like to deal with an exception. And so,
Mhm.
I mean, it's almost worth having the blow up to show them how to properly deal with it.
Yeah.
And you got to give yourself the grace, man. Like we're all trying our best, and
Mhm.
I mean, you're going to screw up. It's okay.
Yeah. Another thing you did very well there, you regulated yourself before you went to the apology.
That's
I
right.
have
That's true. Oh my gosh, that's so important.
because I have I've tried to Camden's too. He can piss me off for a like full-time job if he
It's
wanted to. You know.
amazing what they can do. So, and this is one of the things that I've had to learn to deal with. I am not an angry person, but it's very difficult to make me angry. I've never gotten angry. And so at first I was thinking, wow, that's a really good thing. I'm going to be able to handle my kids just fine. But it turns out that if I had learned to regulate myself, if I was an angry person in high school and I had to, in order to get along with society, I had to figure out how to control my anger, then I'd be way better at it than I am now. I'm
Mhm.
actually probably worse off than somebody who has trouble controlling their anger because I didn't have the skills growing up.
Mm.
Anyway,
Yeah. I forgot where I was.
I was saying Camden has a way of pushing your buttons.
Oh,
He's 2
yeah,
years old, and he
yeah.
has a way of pushing your buttons more than anybody else.
And so what I would do at first, I just thought of another thing too. What I would do at first though is like, hey, he would make me mad, and I would be so upset, but I would be in my head like, I've got to apologize. I got to apologize. So I would go to him while I was still all worked up and like trying to apologize, and essentially be like, "You're not letting me apologize correctly. Come on, man." And like, dude, if maybe you put your own oxygen mask on first,
Yeah,
and then you'll be all right.
you got time. It's all right.
But actually, I do blame one video on the internet I saw, like right before Camden was born. I had like seen one of those like Instagram reels where this guy was like, anytime I'm angry with my kids, I pretend like I am 83 years old and I live in a nursing home and I have a time machine and I can only go back to this one specific point. And so all of a sudden, I'm not going to be angry anymore because, I'm going to be remembering how beautiful the childhood was. And I was like, oh my God, that's great. I'm going to do that the next time. And,
Good
next time
F
Camden
luck, man.
Right. Camden makes me mad, and I failed two things then. I like failed by getting mad, and then I failed by not being able to regulate myself, imagining being 83.
Yeah.
So if I could go
It's
back, I
like
punch that guy.
being on a diet. You're trying to lose weight, oh, I got to lose 15 pounds. And you can tough out the first 5 pounds. Like it's fine. You can like not eat the donuts. I have a real weakness for donuts.
Same.
And you can really, really, you can grit it out. You can have the discipline and all of that stuff. And you'll be able to do that for the first, 2-3 weeks, whatever it is. But in order to go past that, you need to have systematic changes. You need to make sure you need to adjust your consumption such that your cravings are different.
Mm.
If you keep craving donuts, you will eat donuts.
Yeah.
And so you need to get to a place where you don't crave donuts or whatever. And you need to, where you crave the kinds of foods that are going to let you reach your goal. You have to set the thermostat. And the same is true. Like, I can't imagine, I have this other metaphor that I like to use about that. We have two brains in our heads. And one of them is the Sherlock Holmes brain. And that's the brain that the Instagram guy was talking about. I'm in my Sherlock Holmes brain. And so when I start to get angry, I think back to this, magical time when I'm going to be too old and, how am I going to feel about how I acted with my kids? Okay, great. If you can stay in Sherlock Holmes brain, then you've already won. That's the whole game. The whole game is remaining in Sherlock Holmes' brain. Sherlock Holmes' brain is your prefrontal cortex. It's the part that understands reward. It's the part that can analyze through things and make appropriate decisions. That's not the brain you're in when you're mad at your son. You're in the Conan the Barbarian brain. And the Conan the Barbarian brain can't do anything but react. It can't predict. It can't analyze. It can't even recognize the long-term implications of what's happening right now. There's a saber-toothed tiger rushing me, and what do I need to do in order to stay alive for the next 5 seconds? That's the Conan the Barbarian brain. That's the brain that your son is able to drop you into at a moment's notice so effectively. And so the trick is not, what do I do once I'm back in Sherlock Holmes brain? That's not the problem. It's how do I avoid getting into Conan the Barbarian brain in the first place? And that is, I don't know, maybe a lifelong practice. I mean, that is about presence. It's about staying relaxed. It's about recognizing when you're in Conan brain and then getting yourself out of that situation and having mechanisms to do that. Like, I got to take a break here. And, I mean, it's just like trying to solve this sort of thing by toughing it out or by having willpower. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and this reminds me of something that you had said earlier. I think we were talking about maybe anxiety, no, shame, and you said something about like I can feel it, I can feel it in my chest, and so is that like kind of the somatic response? Is that what's letting you know, like, hey, I'm moving out of Sherlock and I'm getting into Conan here? Is that kind of
you need to feel that physical sensation happening, and then you need to do something more productive with it. And I mean. Yeah, I'm not. As I said, I had this. I know all this stuff. I've learned this stuff really well, and I'm actually pretty good at self-regulating and all of that stuff. And yet, literally 2 days ago, I had a situation that, I mean, I would love to live my life over and not do it that way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I got you beat, man. That happened like an hour and a half ago for me.
Well, he's 2, so yeah, it gets so much better, man. Your relationship with your son, it just gets deeper and it gets better. And it's just like, oh man, that's wonderful.
I know that you're right. As angry, as mad as I was, like, I think it was like 5 minutes later, he was holding a hairbrush and was saying, Dad podcast, like, welcome to Dad cast. And I mean, like, I just melted. So yes, I'm sure it does get better.
Yeah, that's so exciting.
How old are your kids?
Mine are 7. My boy is 7 and my daughter is 3.
Oh God. That's like a pretty decent kind of age gap there. They're 2 like very different stages of life, I imagine.
Big time. My daughter is now in that place where everything's no, and she's asserting her independence all over the place. And it's interesting. So, one of the other things I've kind of come to learn through this process is that all kids essentially want 2 things, and these 2 things are intention, like I keep talking about. They want independence and they want connection. And very often they will want them both at the same time. And so they'll be like, get away from me, give me a hug, right? And you've got like that can be maddening. That makes me really mad. If you said get away from me, well, then I'm going to get away from you. And then if you get mad at me for getting away from you, I'm going to be like, why the hell are you mad at me? You told me to get away. And actually, I mean, I kind of feel this reflex to like, okay, you want me to get away from you. I know that's what I want. And so I'm going to punish you by getting away from me. It's so wrong. And so, the key to figuring that stuff out, again, you got to stay in Sherlock Holmes brain so that you can have the analytical capability, processing power to actually deal with this stuff. But if you can, and then you can say, all right, well, what is this kid trying to get to? Does she want independence, or does she want connection? Or to what extent does she want independence or connection? And then I can kind of figure out how to thread that needle. But, it goes back to, you got to stay in Sherlock Holmes brain, and then you got to go meet the need.
The proudest I think I've ever been as a father. Camden was really upset in his room, and I tried to like hold him and console him, and no, Dad, go away. And it was like hitting, and I mean, he was really, really frustrated. Okay, so I sat him down, and I took a couple of steps back, like away from his door, so he couldn't see me. But if anything happened, I'd be able to, get to him. And I mean, I probably waited outside for 5 minutes. I mean, it was a pretty good bit.
Yeah.
But then he finally he walked out of his room and he said, "Hey, Dada, me all better," and like came up, gave me a hug, and then like is like, let's go up to our floor and play in the playroom.
Wow, you should feel a ton of pride about that.
You can just send me my Father of the Decade trophy anytime you want to.
Yeah, that's a real victory in so, I mean, in that model that I explained about the connection and the independence, he was seeking independence. And the only way he knew how to do that was be ugly.
Mhm.
Okay, you can be ugly. That's fine. I'm here for you no matter what. They need to understand that they can be as ugly as they can. And I mean, you will react, but it's not going to change. I'm not going to abandon you. Like, I'm still here.
Right.
If you turn around and decide you need me, then I'm here for you no matter what.
Mhm.
That's one of the things you have to convey to them, of course. But then, so he needs independence. All right, fine. You can have some independence. And then
Love and connection.
give him that.
Love and connection are never conditional. I guess would be a good way of.
And it's so easy to make it connect. I say,
Mhm.
but you have to recognize that it's all about your ego. You feel bad for being treated shitty, so you're going to punish him for that. And so you're going to withhold. You know he wants connection, so you're going to withhold that. All right, well, that's a recipe for absolutely destroying your kid. You want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to Harry Chapin Carpenter's Cats in the Cradle enough time to know that's a bad thing to do, my friend.
There you go. There you go.
Shaun, where can folks find you?
Yeah. So the website is raising.men. Like I said, if I couldn't get that domain name, we wouldn't even be here today. But we're on all the sites, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that stuff. Just search for Raising Men Shaun Dawson, and you will find all my stuff. We're on all the socials too at Raising Men _podcast.
How often do your episodes come out?
Obviously, episodes come out every Wednesday.
Okay. All right, man. And hey, I'm just going to throw myself out there as a guest. I've had an absolute blast today. I'd love to come on, man.
How did you? You will absolutely. You're on the list. My producer will be reaching out.
All right, Shaun. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you acting out with me.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Adam.